Professor Giuseppe Meno of Bologna University, who is hoping in the process to build a Italian National Committee of the Blue Shield, says thank you very much for the opportunity to attend this very interesting conference. And I bring you the greetings and compliments of the Italian Society for the Protection of Cultural Heritage, the SIPBC, whose president Ulandi cannot participate today due to previous commitments. Thanks again and good luck for the next 25 years. So that's one. And from ICOM UAE, it's great to be with you as the director of ICOM UAE. And before that, as a dedicated human-to-human cultural heritage, I hope and deeply wish the Blue Shield doesn't exist. However, I am grateful that it does exist. I think I understand there. I would love we don't exist anymore and more. There are many of our colleagues in Libya, Yemen and more. They do not know that the Blue Shield exists and they don't know what to do to communicate with you. I did my best to send them the contact information. However, I believe we need to open more channels of communication. That I completely agree with and is a critical element. That's there. There are a number of people just saying thank you to everybody, Lynn Edwards, Axel, and we have a note here from Kidong Bai, the Vice President of the Blue Shield from South Korea. And I'm just going to read Kidong's remarks. It is a historical moment for Blue Shield International. Current chairs of the Founding Four are making speeches for the value of BSI for its role in protecting heritage. At the turn of a quarter of a century of history, I wish very much that the Founding Four supports the Blue Shield International activities and its interdependency in its immediate decisions of its own direction for improving its practice and efficient working with strong partnerships with the Founding Four. At this moment, it would be the right time for the Founding Four to contemplate how this organization can survive in the future for better protection in case of emergency of heritage and human rights. It would be a very kind mission that the Founding Four can cope with this. Please think about how we can make this organization at the front for better protection of heritage in case of emergencies. And we have here, in fact, a comment from Abdullah Omiad. Thanks to the speakers and great presentations. Many thanks to all from the Yemen. So there is a connection there. So firstly, would any of those who have spoken so far like to make any further statement or make any points in relation to what any of the others have said? And while Gerald has had to leave us or had to do a recording, we've got Claire Maguire, who is the IFLA representative on the Blue Shield board, joining us to contribute from an IFLA point of view. So over to any of those of you who have spoken. If you would like to say anything more, just raise your hand. I can see you all on my screen. And if not, and you're all keeping your hands down firmly, then I'm just going to make a couple of comments from a few notes that I scribbled as you were all speaking. And I think I'm not actually going to attribute them to anybody because many of you said the same things, but in slightly different ways. So I'm just going to go from there, and I hope to generate some discussion. And I hope, and I know that many of these points are going to come up later in the day, not least in when I finish the afternoon off later on. The first critical thing is we must continue to work together, what I will term later on as partnerships. It is absolutely crucial. The Blue Shield doesn't exist without the Founding Four. That's critical, but we have now many other partners who are increasingly important to our network, and we must keep those going. There are a couple of instances of where people mentioned the very proactive work that your organizations do in terms of supporting the Blue Shield, not least, just as one example, ICOM's chairing and the work on the accreditation committee for the Blue Shield. So that's been really helpful and very good. Yes, Emily wrote it down, I wrote it down: global challenges, global responses and collaboration. We couldn't say it better. One of you also mentioned funding being the biggest challenge. And yes, while we have managed to help fund a secretariat, albeit very small, 1.5 people, through my UNESCO chair in cultural property protection and peace at Newcastle University, that is not funding that will go on long term into the future. At the moment, that funding finishes on the 31st of December 2023. And I had the first meeting with the university last week about whether they will want to apply for a further 4-year phase of the chair from 2024 to the end of 2027. And it was a positive meeting, but we won't know probably for another 12 months or so, depending on a whole range of factors. So yes, funding is crucial. The university at Newcastle, and I think we should all applaud them, have taken on it, itself through me to fund or make the funding available to allow Emma and Michael, who you'll meet in a few minutes, to do the work that they do and to build Blue Shield. As I've said before, just I'm going to say silly things, but absolutely fundamental things like organizing this conference would not have happened without Emma and without that funding. So Newcastle University is in a fairly bizarre situation of being one university in the world, but actually funding an international organization through its endowment funding. And that's been remarkable as a contribution to the Blue Shield. So that's critical. The other thing that a number of you mentioned, either directly or indirectly, was essentially, and this is again something that I'm going to be talking about when I speak later, but an expansion of the role of Blue Shield away from just the 54 convention. And back in '96, it wasn't entirely there just as the 54 convention, but that had been the driver. Very soon, as we saw from some of Emma's contributions, there were members of those 4 who signed were talking about protecting natural heritage, intangible heritage and the such. But that's something that has built and grown, I think, over the 25 years. Yes, we're sort of rooted in trying to mitigate the impact of armed conflict, but we also see the importance of responding to natural and human-made disaster and to deal not only with culture and cultural heritage, but natural heritage as well, as many parts of the world don't recognize a distinction between those two and between tangible and intangible. Again, I'll be making a point that the tangible is indivisibly intertwined with the intangible, because intangible heritage is incorporated in us, in human beings. And if we don't protect the human beings, there is little point in protecting their tangible heritage. So those are just some of the points that I picked out of your fascinating and very timely contributions. So thank you very much for that. There is time if anybody wants to say anything more. There is time for anybody listening, and I'm going to pause for a moment, and if anybody wants to take the floor, otherwise we can go a few minutes early to our break. Alberto.
I don't want to postpone the break, sorry, but I just want to highlight something that was said to we all, and I want to highlight the devastating effects of the climate crisis on our natural and cultural heritage at a global level. Really, I really think that this is it's an imperative of our times. And we have to, in each organization, each member, each museum, each library, Blue Shield, of course, has to focus on this challenge, because I want just to underline that the dramatic biodiversity loss and the climate crisis show how tight the relations are between man, biosphere, and geosphere. And we have to take into account that, we all talk about that indigenous communities are at the forefront of this climate crisis. Also, not only their livelihoods are under threat, but also their cultural and natural heritage cannot survive. And even native languages are in constant decline because of the climate crisis. Not only because of the climate crisis, but certainly the climate crisis is impacting so much larger and larger part of the world. So I just wanted to highlight that in 2019, the ICOM General Assembly in Kyoto passed a resolution on sustainability and the implementation of Agenda 2030. Really, the 2030 agenda has become the fundamental reference for ICOM's work in the next decade and beyond. And I really think that this is something that unifies all of us, and again, needs for more effective cooperation.
I thank you, Alberto, for drawing that back to our attention as a critical element. I cannot but agree with you. My 4 adult children question me in my commitment to cultural property protection when they say what I should be putting all my time and effort into is climate change and trying to stop climate change. And this morning I was reading an article, if you'll allow me just very briefly, which was just questioning the whole economic basis of the stranglehold that we have at the moment of how we deal with some of the issues around climate change. And that is around the way that all the world's economies and all of the world's international financial institutions essentially work on GDP, gross domestic product. And until, so the argument runs, we work on something different, in other words, GEP, gross environmental product, we will not be able to address the climate change issue. And that's just a fascinating way of beginning to think about that as a prompt. We really do need to address what we're talking about in terms of climate change in a way that is so fundamentally different to what is the norm today. So, Claire, you have your hand up, and I will just check if there are any other questions in the chat. But Claire, please.
I would just briefly wholeheartedly second that and point out that, you know, when we look at threats to cultural property, we're looking at multiple threats. So addressing climate change is also addressing all of the other hazards that come along with disaster associated with climate change, be that trafficking, be that human-caused conflict, and so on. So it's really not a separate issue. And I think in addition to addressing this, all of our organizations, and in fact, practitioners across the cultural heritage field are looking and exploring and raising awareness of the role of cultural heritage as climate action technology, and the lessons that all of our institutions and our profession can offer, and the solutions we can all offer to threats associated with climate change. So I just, I wanted to take the opportunity to second that and say that the work that that we're doing here and ensuring that our material, our cultural property exists into the future is also contributing to the search for solutions. So we're very eager from IFLA's point of view to continue our involvement in this work, and thank you for, I'm glad we could raise this very important issue here as well.
Claire, thank you. The two comments in the chat. So JL, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who JL is, but JL says much of disaster management is about prevention. Absolutely right. We have to do that, and I will pick that up as I speak later. How is this being done by Blue Shield in terms of climate change? And the simple answer to that, JL, is not well enough. And the reason behind that is that we don't have the capacity to do much more in what we're trying to do. But we are aware of that shortfall, and we are going to try and do something about it. I'll come to Teresa in a moment, but then I just want to JL has just responded to me saying we're doing so much already with a smile. Yes, we are, but we're not doing enough, JL. So Lisa Mole says, I would say it's not either or when it comes to climate change. We know climate change and conflict are likely to be intertwined. In fact, they are already intertwined and tied to resource scarcity. So we've got that. Okay, now I'm very happy we are eating in a little bit to our very long break. So I'm going to carry on with doing that. We've got Teresa and Emma who both would like to speak briefly. And so Teresa first and then Emma.
Very briefly, can you listen to me?
No, can't hear you. Yes.
Yeah, it's trying to answer to the question of GL, what to do about climate change. I wanted to return back to our main phrase of this morning, the global challenge, call for a global collaboration.
Yeah.
Climate change is a global problem. And for this, we really need to work all together with the same goal. And of course, well, ICOMOS, we are starting already working very much with climate change. We have a specific working group that is working for how to mitigate and how to improve the resilience of our heritage and of our communities for climate change. So there, once more, I think the Founding Four have a role to play with Blue Shield for these climate change risks and challenging. Okay, thank you very much.
Teresa, thank you. Emma.
I'd also just like to add that whilst we are not, like myself, Michael and Peter, doing so much in the Blue Shield international level, obviously the Founding Four are, and many of our national committees around the world, very heavily engaged with this work, and they have members from ICOM, ICOMOS, IFLA and ICA as well. And I think Claire might be mentioning a little bit about that in her presentation after the break, but also you can see more about that in the reports of the national committees through our website and in their presentations and the news stories about their work. So a lot of the climate change prevention work is really happening at the national level. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Emma. Yes, that's a very good point.